I'm Arun Malhotra. Welcome to ETAuto Unplugged. The show in which we talk to industry leaders and industry thought leaders on various facets of the auto industry. In this episode, we'll be discussing on the evolution of the Indian auto industry. If we take the year 1983, the auto industry was still at a very infancy stage. Hardly 50,000 cars were sold. Today we're talking of a figure of 4 million. And that was the time when the industry evolved with the entry of Maruti Suzuki, LML, the 4 Japanese LCVs, and the 4 Japanese motorcycles, Yamaha, Honda, Suzuki, Kawasaki. Just to get a view, a perspective, how this industry has evolved with time, we talked to a person who's seen it all. And we're talking to one of the industry stalwarts. Everybody knows him by name. And this is Mr. Arvind Saxena, who has worked in the two-wheeler companies in the initial phase of his career, in Escorts and in Bajaj Auto. And he's also worked in the four-wheeler industry in Maruti, Suzuki, Hyundai, Volkswagen. And last assignment was as President and MD CEO. After moving out of the corporate world, he still is there in the auto domain. He runs his own startup. He's a co-founder of ZeroMileCars.com. So welcome Arvind Saxena to the show. Hello Arvind, how are you?
Thank you.
So Arvind, before we start on this discussion on this fascinating journey on the evolution of the auto industry, we wanted to know something about you as a person. Starting from your school, college, how you grew up, why you chose the subjects which you chose, and any interesting insights which our viewers would like to know.
That's almost taking you back to 50 years.
Yeah, we're going down memory lane.
Well, I come from a small town of UP, which is Allahabad. And I think I spent most of my time from school till my engineering was in Allahabad. And Allahabad, as you know, at the old time, it used to be a place where civil services were the flavor of the city. I mean, everybody used to, aspire to be a civil servant in his career. Well, it started like that for me, but somewhere in between when I got into engineering, I personally thought that maybe I am not good for that, but maybe good for other sector. And that's how the things changed. And I've been all through a very much keen in sports and games. So, I mean, Allahabad was a very nice place. I still have very fond memories of that place.
Which were the sports you played during the school college
Almost
days?
all, I think. I used to play regularly badminton, tennis, squash, and these are some of the sports that I played.
Those days, we had this funda that, people who are academically strong, their parents asked them to focus on studies, to keep sports out.
No, I don't think we ever had that challenge. Of course, I won't say that I was a very brilliant student. I was a very average student. But yeah, I was keen into the games and sports. I mean, that's how it was.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
So, starting from your corporate journey, you started your corporate journey in 83?
Well, I started after I did my engineering in 1980. I had a small stint with a company called Jost Engineering. It was in a paints business. And then, of course, the real corporate journey started in 83 with Escorts, yes.
Okay. So, 83 motorcycles, Escorts, which is there. And Escorts was the leader in motorcycle industry at that point of time. So, if we just go back, which territory did you handle in the first assignment?
Well, my first professional territory to handle was Bihar.
Bihar, oh.
Yes. A very interesting place, and I think I owe all my learning to that market. It was generally seen as a very tough market to travel and to handle, but I think I had a great learning from that.
So, from a perspective of learnings which you said, from a dealer perspective, customer perspective, territory perspective, what are the things you remember? Something interesting, insight or anecdotes you have?
I think initial time was very, very interesting. It was actually everything was new for me as far as professional career was concerned. But I must say that Escorts was way ahead in terms of their systems, facing dealers, facing customers, and dealers also a very good set of dealers, in fact, especially in a market like Bihar. It was a very important territory from the business point. We contributed fairly large volume for the company. Dealers were all kinds. I mean, we had, I remember, had pretty big dealers, so to say, and also small, like Papa Mama shop, and people used to sit in the counter and talking to the customers directly. And there were dealers who were pretty large. They had one or two other business interests, and Even at that time, I remember some of the dealers even had their CEOs running motorcycle business.
Which is something
That
people
was
don't imagine that.
very, very ahead of time. Yeah.
Okay. So motorcycles, you were there in the industry, and that was a phase where at least the competition in motorcycles has set in.
Yeah.
All the big four, Yamaha, Honda, Suzuki, Kawasaki had come to the market. And ESD and Enfield were feeling the pressure, and Rajdoot also as a product felt the pressure. So what did you observe in those days when the competition really set in from a market perspective, from a dealer perspective?
No, market-wise, I would say the same thing happened even in 83, 84 or around that time. Competition always helps increase your market, and that's what actually happened.
Okay.
Because with competition, what had happened that you had newer products and with far more latest technology, features, completely different products being offered to the customer, and that has attracted a lot of people to even buy out the new products, which they were even not thinking at that time, because choices were very, very limited and very clear at that moment. Rajdoot had one profile, ESD had another profile, Enfield had third profile.
There was no overlapping
So
of
there was
products.
no overlap, clear demarcated profile. But once these companies came and their products came, that is where the real competition started. And I think everybody was truly fighting for their pie.
So interesting. Financing wasn't very strong. When did financing really set into the market?
Well, financing in small ways started, I would say, in 88, 89.
Okay.
But in a very small way and very tough conditions, I must say. But still, the leader at that time was, I remember, Citibank.
Very unlikely.
Yeah.
Not a State Bank of India, not a HDFC.
No
but a
Indian
Citibank.
bank was interested in financing two-wheeler, but Citibank had a program called SELP, if I remember. And that's where the financing truly started. And it also helped, I think, but they were restricted. I mean, they were only restricted to corporates and they were not lending to individuals. So where the corporate guarantees were being given for the repayment. But it helped, I think, a lot of people to own up the vehicles.
The culture of financing started
It started, I think, around 88, 89 with
Acha,
Citibank.
That's interesting. MNC Bank, which has no retail has presence today, was the one who was the proponent of financing.
And even if you look at their profile for Citibank, I think their profile was not the ones who own two-wheelers at that point. But still, they recognized the opportunity in that segment and they jumped into.
Now coming to, looking at the industry and two-wheelers competition started, four-wheelers followed later. What do you consider the landmarks or the major changes, you can say the main inflection points which happened in the industry over the time?
I think first, of course, was I think 83 or around that time when, of course, India still used to give out licenses for setting up new businesses. And that is the time I remember some 22 licenses were given out in the automotive segment, especially in two-wheelers especially. So that I would say is a big inflection point for that segment altogether. And of course, I won't remember the numbers as of now, but significant jump happened in terms of volume in the next 5 years. After In Suzuki came and Hero Honda came, and then of course Escorts also came with Yamaha. They were the three major fighters in the market. So that always helped. Second, I would say the inflection point was with Maruti coming into four-wheeler. That again was the same time as 83. But then again, the numbers were still very controlled for Maruti. The numbers actually came up in the four-wheeler business was in the 95, 96, when everybody started setting up shop here, which was, I think, Daewoo came at that time. GM came.
Was it linked to the liberalization of the government at that time?
It was clearly that liberalization, I think, which pushed people to look at India.
So a lot of companies came that time.
Everybody came around that time. And I think one very different understanding which most of these MNCs had at that point of time was considering Maruti was very successful in this market and with a small car. They always thought that like what happens in West, customer will switch over to the larger cars. So because most of the others, I think, never had any small cars, so to say, like Maruti 800 or of that segment. So they all had sedans. So once which came at that time, I remember everybody brought in sedan first, thinking everybody will, jump onto the sedans from the small cars. but I think India, being India, I mean, we're still very different in terms of our reaction to the products and markets. So we continue to be a small car market. So that their coming in with a sedan did not change the market much. Of course, it created more choices for the customer. But I think significant difference happened when Daewoo brought in Matiz and Santro was introduced by Hyundai. I think that's where everything started. And then even Tata brought in their Indica.
So this happened in 3-4 years.
In about 3 years.
So one of the learnings was that think global but act local.
Absolutely.
Companies which did not act local thought that whatever their learnings from foreign markets, Hindustan wahi hoga. Jaisa desh waisa base.
It may not happen like that, and it never happened in India like that.
Achha.
And India, I think the customer profile is also very different compared to if you look at the developed markets. The customers here I would say, were more price conscious, which today I would say they are more value conscious.
Achha. Us time price conscious
was the price conscious zyada thi, I think, and that is where people could not, I would say, switch over to sedans. They were more, they could afford small cars, and I think that's where the market was at that time.
So the big jump in four-wheelers coincided with a lot of companies coming in together in the mid-90s. That was the time when there was a proliferation of that industry.
I would say the later 90s,
when
when the hatchbacks came in, and which also coincided with a lot of public sectors jumping with their finance programs.
Oh, so that also coincided with that?
Almost the same time. I think that's when Countrywide came in and whole lot of other banks, then HDFC came, ICICI came. And they really created a new segment, so to say. People who used to earlier, look at saving money to buy cars, they were actually jumping and buying cars and then paying later. So that culture of buying now, pay later started at that time.
Tell me one or two incidents when you were in the market and you were the dealers, and I'm talking from the early phases in the first 10, 15 years. One or two incidents, interesting incidents stand out, which made you think differently. एक दो अलग अलग होते हैं ना, एक दो कुछ ऐसी चीजें होती हैं कि भैया ये गुजरा था तो इससे कुछ सोच आपकी बदल गई या आपने देखा कि दुनिया बदल रही है.
No, one I think major change happened in the industry was.
आपके personal incident कोई हो ऐसा?
I mean, I may not like to give any names of people, but
not names, but incidents.
But instances were that I think till 96, 97, everybody was still very, very comfortable in whatever they had to sell. And I think suddenly when the competition came, it was very difficult for dealers to really face that upfront, because till then they're all habituated to cars against the long bookings. There virtually no working capital required. Customers are putting money to buy, and they were all depending on their sales margin, so to say. So I think that's where the change started coming in, where people realize that it's not only the sales margin which will make the dealership viable. But after sales till then was seen more as a liability. Because आपने गाड़ी बेची तो आपको सर्विस देनी पड़ेगी, आपको 3 फ्री सर्विस देनी है. But उस टाइम में ये नहीं किसी ने सोचा कि शायद पैसा इसी में है. If you retain your customer, that's where you milk the customer truly, from workshop as well as buying cars again and again from the same dealer. So I think that was a very major change, which actually happened around, I would say, late 90s. People realized that, but it became more and more predominant as 2000 onwards.
That was something interesting.
Yeah.
Parallelly, when you look at two-wheelers and four-wheelers, and one is customers will be different, so let's not talk customers, we'll talk later. But from the dealership model wise, how is it the difference in the two-wheeler dealership model and the four-wheeler dealership model?
See, I would say fundamentally the business is the same. I mean, it is no different. But if you look at the earlier times, the dealers, I think customer centricity was a bigger issue, because the demand was far more than what was available in the market. Dealers were not really pushing themselves out to sell more and more cars. Because there was situation like allocation, there were times like quotas for the vehicles which are given to dealer, whether it is, I think, two-wheeler or even four-wheeler for that matter. So dealers were not, it's a very simple thing. Nobody would open door for a customer when he's walking into the showroom. It's a very simple thing. After all, वो customer आ रहा है आपका गाड़ी खरीदने के लिए, उसी पे हर चीज depend करती है. आपने showroom भी उसी के लिए बनाया है. But I don't think dealers were in the situation where they would open door for the customers. I think that has changed substantially. I mean, today I'm sure more and more dealerships that you go, I mean, you'll find people at the door to ask, how can I help you, sir? So I think there's a very, very major change happened in the last initial time and the, let's say, post 2000s.
One thing which I remember clearly that time was this stranglehold of the brokers in the sale process.
Yeah.
Brokers, whether it's on Delhi market, in Karol Bagh, or maybe Ludhiana, maybe Chennai, every city had a strong broker market. And dealers may say we sell it, but a lot of sales did happen through brokers. So how did this change? Or why it used to happen? It happened till quite a long time.
No, I think brokers essentially in any commodity or any product will only come up when there's a shortage.
Oh, yeah.
And there is some incremental margin for them. It will only happen when the product which is being sold, the demand is far, far higher than the supply. So that will create a layer of margin for intermediaries. And that's where, and unfortunately, the allocations of the vehicles at that time, and particularly for Maruti, I would say, were based on bookings that they have. So in order to garner more and more booking, there used to be dealers, not dealers I would say, but brokers used to book vehicles. And they used to take delivery and then sell it to the customers at a premium, unfortunately at a premium. But as the supplies increased, availability of cars increased and the competition happened. I think that's gradually those brokers really moved out. Many of them then became DSAs of the banks because gradually the finance penetration was increasing, which of course started with the smaller numbers for individuals, but overall I think it went up to as high as 60, 70, 75% of the financing. So there is a layer of finance commission which allowed these brokers, because they knew this market well, they had customers with their hands. So they converted themselves as a DSA, direct selling agents for the banks. And I think the third phase for them was when many of the good ones eventually decided and took over the dealerships.
Okay.
Because they were already into the business, they were arranging finance, they had customers, they knew how to sell cars. They eventually ended up taking a dealerships.
So a lot of professionalism came in that sense. That professionalized or perished. A lot of dealers did perish at that time.
It was. I think many dealers who did not change themselves with the changing time and also the changing demands of customers, they perished. I mean, I know many of them actually perished in that.
So, people with all the resources, all the locations, all the brands, they still perished. That means if you don't change with the changing world, बदलती दुनिया के साथ आप नहीं चलते तो बदल जाते हैं.
I think customer is paramount, frankly. I mean, if you are not able to satisfy your customer, there is no way you could continue. It is fine as long as you're in a distribution market and there's a lack of supply. But if customer has choices, he will only go where he's welcomed, where he feels wanted. And I think that's where they decided to move to other places. Then they said, no way but to
there was no way out, which is there.
Yeah.
Now, coming to, buying decision making. Slightly in early times, the male member, the earning member used to call the shots, whether in terms of deciding or in rural areas, there were opinion makers, sarpanch, doctor of that area, or जो community का incharge था. When did this start changing? Because this was a very stranglehold. The entire decision making process, which ultimately led to the buying process, was in a certain manner.
No, I think that's a very traditional way the market started. But I think overall, especially if you look at difference between two-wheelers and cars, I would say still to a large extent used to be family decision.
Achha, even those early days.
Even in those early times, I think. Especially when the cars were available with the choices. Okay. Not if you have only one car available, maybe there was not much choice. But once the choices were available, I think it was a family decision. And that's where, because I think car is a much bigger purchase for Indian consumer. It's like two big things one does in their lifetime is a house and a car. So it was that important at that point. So naturally everybody was involved, but well, it's difficult to say that who to what extent would influence it, but I think collectively if everybody has the same view, I think that made life easier.
Look at the rural market. I mean, since you said your first assignment was in Bihar, and Bihar was basically agrarian and rural. Those were Sitamaris and Begusarais and Babua, those places. How they would have changed with time? Because what is your image of those places when you used to go to these places?
No, I mean, I would say.
Anything interesting when you go to these places, that time you went?
Well, the only thing I remember traveling long by buses to those places,
Road
overnight buses.
AC buses, non-AC buses?
Well, definitely non-AC, and the only luxury that time used to be video coaches.
Actually, video coach was a
where
luxury
you can
point.
watch movie in the 3 hours, 4 hours, and then reach the destination. But these places were, I would say, still in a developing stage. And they're like bigger villages, I would say. I mean, they were very, very small. And the choice of transportation was only two-wheelers and motorcycle. And that's where I think Rajut had a very strong hold in those markets. Because that was very rough and very economical at that point of time. Well, things changed when the new models came. A lot of other brands were available. But those were typically two-wheeler markets. And I think even today when you look at, I would say, sales of four-wheelers in those markets would still be lower compared to many other states. They were a low per capita consumption of cars. They are still developing, I would say, because of no industries, not many industries there, barring majorly one refinery and one or two other things in the Bihar, northern
But
Bihar.
certain states are more developed. No?
Certain states are more developed. So Odisha, I think, has improved better.
So rural would be different in different states.
It would vary, I would say.
It will not be one. You can't have a pan-India approach to.
No, I don't think so.
अच्छा. एक जो हमारे ज़माने में कहते थे, do you know those things की auspicious time, festival,
Oh yes.
लगन, तारा चल रहा है, तारा डूब गया. Is it still there or is it gone down or it's just camouflaged with a more stylish approach?
I think it has declined to a large extent, I would say, compared to what it was.
But do people buy vehicles in?
People still buy. I think they still won't buy on Saturday because it's steel. I'm sure the people.
So even in the urban area, when you go to on a Dhanteras day or you go on the first Navratra,
the big
still full, even in Delhi's Bombay city. So
Raj,
दुनिया बदली नहीं इतनी
I
जितनी.
remember Jaipur still has 90% sale of the week happens only on Wednesday when everybody goes to the Ganesh temple. So those are, I think, deep-rooted religious beliefs that I think we have. Those may not change as much, but things like Shraddh booking, which used to be taboo at that, if I look at 30 years back, I think it's declined in the last 15, 20 years, especially when the profile of
Deliveries will be taken in Shraddh or not?
People may take, but still avoid if they can. But with younger generation really owning cars today, much younger in their life, I think they are not as much bothered as a little elderly or middle-aged people. So that is making a difference, I think.
Customer centricity, you said one point which had to come because the customer, there was more choice. Customer was more educated. Younger people were coming into it. So anything, what would you define as the defining points of customer centricity which changed?
See, one is getting cars thinking those customers in mind, whether it could be in terms of smaller features, like audio system. It used to be very, very basic if you look at 20, 25 years back. It was a very basic thing. But
radio
today,
was
infotainment system is a very important thing today. I think because customers spend so much time in traveling, whether in a big city or even an intercity, they need a better infotainment system. So I think what customer centricity means actually something, keep designing or defining products, keeping customers in mind, which would mean features which they like. I mean, there are features which give a wow feeling to a customer. I mean, if you, I've heard about, let's say, sunroof. Who uses sunroof in this country? The weather is not such. Barring 2 months in a year.
Would you call it shoshebazi?
No, people enjoy it. It's not question shosha. You feel good about it. It's not necessarily that showing it off. But there are features which give you satisfaction, like cruise control. How many times you can use cruise control? It's a very small cost feature, but people like it. Whenever they have to use, they should have that feature. So I think customer has also, because they become very demanding over the time, and they are more aware because of internet. They know what features are available in the world and what it means to them. So it has allowed more and more companies to design products and looking at the products which have those elements into them. And that's a big change actually has happened. If you really look at cars in the last, I would say 15, 20 years, they are far more better packed in terms of features in this country.
A lot of MNCs came with some designs they had to change. What do you think they realized? One is the size of the vehicle. Okay, now you got the vehicle there. But certain changes in designs or customer insight, which they had to gather.
No, I think some very basic thing is, I mean, if you really are, we don't have a same height of a speed breaker in this country.
The speed breaker हमारे यहाँ तो
So many cars which are running in Europe for that matter, there are no speed breakers truly.
ground clearance comes.
So ground clearance is a very big challenge for many of them, I think. But now people have realized the newer cars which are being designed by same companies today, I think have a better ground clearance. I mean, there's a very simple thing. Then a rear seat comfort.
अच्छा, the owner.
Most cars in the world, I mean, having a driver is not an easy thing any part of the world. But in India, even a small car, compact car, you'll still find driving. People, being driven by somebody. More than that, I think driver is only one part of it. But this becomes a family car, where you have people sitting in the rear seat. Now, rear seat comfort is as important as the front seat comfort in India.
Which is not.
While in Europe and many other parts of the world, people drive themselves. So that's why you always find the driver's seat is the most packed seat.
That is why even now in luxury cars, finding people are trying to improve the rear seat space or ground clear or basically wheelbase.
So I think there's a fundamental change the way cars are used in developed market or a Western market and in India. So while people will want everything of that, but they still want something which are specific for these markets, like good air conditioning. Europe may need only the heater, may not need the cooling, but we need cooling as well as heating. Both are the best of the performance.
Any practices of international dealership, did they come into the Indian market or generally our dealership systems evolved from the base? Anything which you could say, but this was transplanted from foreign countries to domestic, our country?
No, I would say the fundamentals are same, but I think over the years what Indian markets have adopted is a lot of IT-based things like dealer management software, which I would say came in India a little later than what had happened in the western part of the world. And which means they realize the value of holding a customer data with you. Because in a life of a customer, he would buy 3 or 4 cars. Now, if you do not keep the data and you stay in touch with that customer, it's like customer for life concept. It has been very dominant in the western part, which I think came in little later in India. But today it's well entrenched. I think every dealer, every company is behind protecting their data and using their data to an extent where they want to retain customers. So these are, I think, one of the, I would say, important practice which came in here.
So when the COVID struck in the country, one of the things which was propounded a lot by companies is the digital journey. Now a customer does not have to visit the showroom. Everything can be done at the customer's location. So his inquiry, his tracking, his selection will happen digitally. How much do you think it is practical? How much is just hawabazi and how much is the reality in this?
No, I would say that car buying is still a very, very major decision in one's buying, in his life. And car is something where a lot of experience also matters. So I would say the final process of buying would actually happen very physically. It's not that you book car online and then wait for a car delivery to happen like Amazon boxes at your home. It will not happen. But I think what digital world has done, and to an extent, there are a lot of pre-buying process of investigating product, comparing your product. All that has become very, very, very much possible, I would say, because of digital part of it, journey. And I think that is very, very critical. Otherwise, for a customer to, whenever he is thinking of buying a car, he would have 3 to 4 models in his consideration set. To really get down to finding the details of all those 4 and then comparing himself, it's a very long drawn process. But digitally, it is very, very easy today. Secondly, I would say not only digital, but even internet information of the models and features worldwide. So they can really narrow down to things or features that they want today or in their own car, whether it is to do with an engine, whether it's done with a feature, whether it's to do with the infotainment system or even safety for that matter. Now, till that part, it is fine. But once it narrows down to the X model of a car, I'm very sure even today the customer go down to that showroom and get a touch and feel of that product before he really puts the money there.
So there is no substitute for feel and touch and going there.
Absolutely no. Absolutely.
और दूसरा एक बात उठी थी कि यार why you need to own a car? People can all order Ola, Uber, cars will disappear. एक famous banker had said, made a statement which was all over the media.
I'm not sure whether that would happen really, but yes, over in a bigger cities, if you ask me, I think Ola, Uber offer you a very good opportunity to going from one place to another rather than driving yourself.
Is it a substitute for ownership?
It may not be. The substitute doesn't mean that all 7 days you will drive in Ola and Uber. Maybe weekend still you will have, you want to have your car. Evenings you want to use your own car. But maybe for longer distances. So it could be a good balance between the two, I think. Even in Western world, I think it has not completely replaced your personal car ownership. While people do use Uber everywhere, all over the world, for various other reasons, but they still have their own cars.
There's all this talk of emission and safety. I mean, they have been incorporated in the vehicle. How much you think is because the government wants it or it's become a law, and how much is the change of heart of the customer? अगर आपको देना है इसमें तराजू में तोलना है कि how much would have, suppose the government had not put any criteria on emissions or had been very liberal on emissions on safety, how would it have evolved? Now we're talking of airbags, 4 airbags, crash tests, various things. From we're talking of Euro 2 to Euro 6, we're talking of things. How much do you think is customer driven and how much is government driven?
See, I think many of these features, if you ask me, the emission related, may not be as much customer driven as a government regulation driven, but in a right direction, so to say. Because eventually, if you look at the environment effects that one is facing today, I think we need to take these steps. And government, I would say lately, in the last 15 years or so, it's been very proactive in creating these regulations at the regular interval. Safety is still, I would say, while it's being pushed by the government, it's a good direction to take. But customer-wise, I'm not very sure how many of them are so safety conscious, so to say. Because I still find people driving on the wrong side of the road, which is like
how many people use rear
and
seat
how
belts?
many people use the rear seat belts. So I think it would still take a long time before people realize it. But I think government has made the intention clear by making sure that cars are safe enough, or the cars have a fair amount of emission, which is acceptable. But I think implementation, lot needs to be done, and customer education still needs more to be done.
Okay. In your career, you worked with various managements. Indian company, Japanese, European, American, Korean. If you have to give 2 attributes in short form, Indian, you cannot standardize things. I know there is no stereotyping, but just for a perspective.
No, it's difficult to say actually. See, everybody is very keen to do business.
Business
and a successful business.
But style of management.
Style, it also depends on the social, how it has evolved, I think. If you ask
From your
me,
experience basis.
European and Americans, I think more participative for that matter, I would say, in terms of, but each one eventually does everything to do a good business and a good for the customer. I think their customer centricity is far, far higher compared to, I won't say today, but if you really see over the period of time, they are more aligned to the customers, and they would really try and do things which are really needed for the customers. Japanese, Korean, one is of course the language sometimes create a bit of challenge for them, but they are also very thorough, very system oriented, I think. Both of them are very, very system oriented, and they would like to follow the steps which they have learned over the years to do successful business and not take any shortcuts. So, I mean, each one has his own way of working, but they're very, very key to that success in every market.
So, there's no specific, I mean, it would not be, they would have their own styles, but the basic output or the approach they were looking at is fairly similar.
Absolutely.
Similar in terms of getting their sales in their numbers and market share, which is there.
Absolutely.
One question which a lot of people do ask is that, India was supposed to become the export hub of cars. Two-wheelers have become. Somehow, leave aside Maruti, Hyundai, Maruti does a large volume, but generally the exports volumes is nothing much to talk about.
No, there are two reasons I would say behind this. One is the kind of products that we have. See, the products that we consume here may not have very large market outside India.
Okay.
So you possibly can't make very huge exports out of those markets. Only some markets like South Africa or maybe South America, they also consume the kind of products that we make in India to some extent. That is one reason. And second major reason is that many of these countries also have become more aggressive in getting their manufacturing bases into those places. Naturally, once you have your own manufacturing base, let's say in Mexico for that matter, or in Brazil, if you have your own manufacturing base, it will always be cheaper and better for them to produce cars there than do it export from here. Because globally, if you have different hubs of manufacturing by any multinational, you would only like to maximize wherever you have your manufacturing bases. So it is, I think, the product profile which makes a big, I think, challenge for companies to export from here. Unless we come to a situation where we have products, let's say sedan, become big here and also big outside, maybe that would be more successful. But hatchbacks would always have a limitation of export from here.
And some companies who have a long presence in this country, they still don't export from here. They do export from Thailand.
It depends. Again, I think, see, in a global structure, you would have to really study the capacities available across the world and the product portfolio available across the world. That decides rather than simply promoting India outside.
Okay, so nobody is on that key India promoted. India has to compete against the world
Obviously,
markets.
you have to eventually compete, and you have to be competing as an exporter and for an importer in that country.
Okay.
Then only it can happen.
So now we're coming to a rapid fire round. So are you ready for a rapid fire round?
Let's see what is it.
So you'll have to wear 3 hats in the rapid fire round. One is, once I'll ask you to wear the hat of a manufacturer or OEM. Second time I'll ask you to wear the hat of a dealer. And third time I'll ask you to wear the hat of a government.
Let me try.
So are you ready?
Yeah.
So from a manufacturer point of view, what are 2 things you would want the dealers to do which they are not doing, and 2 things which you want the government to do which they could help in promoting the industry?
For dealers, I think
From a manufacturer's hat you're wearing now.
clearly the make systems and follow those systems for the customers.
Customer orientation.
Customer orientation is a far more important thing for them.
So that is one thing you like them to do.
And second, I think very important is to have customer retention process. While really own a customer for his entire life cycle. Because today most companies have good product portfolio, and if they really work on that, they should make sure not allow the customers to go out of that portfolio and make the best out of that customer.
Okay, good. Now, from a dealer perspective, what would you think, what would you want? And I'm not talking about a particular company. It's a general voice which I'm trying to capture. If you had a wish list, a dealer had a wish list, that I want by the OEMs or the manufacturer to do these 2 things which they're not doing, what would you put it across?
Again, I would say product is very important for dealer. See, simply, I've seen many forums of dealers in my career. While margin is always a point of discussion, but believe me, that's not the only thing which will ever help. Because if you can't retain that margin, it's of no use.
So you want them.
So product is very, very
refreshing
critical.
the product line.
Timely managing the product life cycle and also introduction of our products.
And second point, wish list. कि डीलर की दिल की आवाज है सर ये नहीं मैन्युफैक्चर करती ये करना चाहिए.
I think second is clearly to see business as a business, to make sure that you offer a viable business to each dealer. And I think that's what every dealer looks for. That they should be sensitive to whether in the costs of doing that business and what are the returns they are getting. How manufacturers can help them get better returns. Not simply selling out cars and talking only of the numbers of market shares.
Okay. And now from the government's point of view, if the government had a wish list, here you have industry association, you're saying these are 2 things we want industry to do. We are giving a lot of things. We are giving PLI, we are giving FAME, we are giving various other things, Make in India. But these are 2 things which you must do, which you are not doing. What would the government tell manufacturers?
I think one, clearly the employment for generation, directly, indirect, both, I think employment generation. which eventually would happen once the business grows. So I think while the government is creating all environment for economy to grow better and better, they should create more capacities to more production here, so that it creates
That's one.
more employment. And second, I would say the manufacturers should also government would expect them to come up with better standards of, let's say, safety, emission, proactively would possibly should come up with those.
Now coming to the last point, two things which you think will not change even if we suppose met 10 years down the line in terms of the customer, the dealer interaction or this thing, or from the market, and two things which will dramatically change. So two things which will continue the way it is, and two things which will dramatically change. This is your crystal gazing exercise.
I think one is the way business is done today would continue to be same.
So the dealer model, business model
I
change
think
nahi hoga.
dealer business model, fundamental business model may not change much.
Okay, so that you think will not change.
But I think dependence on digital media would substantially increase over the next 10 years. And also the ownership cycles may change a lot, which could be a good thing for the industry. People may tend to change their cars more often than what they do today.
Good. Are you hopeful? We last 5-7 years, the growths have somewhat slowed down in both in the two-wheelers especially and also in the passenger four-wheelers. Are you hopeful that big growth will come again, or we've reached a point that we'll only have these small growths?
Two-wheelers, I'm not very sure whether it will really show a big surge of growth, but four-wheelers definitely. I think we have a long way to go. And I think this is how most markets have evolved. Two-wheelers have plateaued at some stage where cars have gone through the roof.
So two-wheelers are challenging times.
Yes.
One is penetration is higher, the entry-level models are less, but four-wheelers, the scope for growth is still much higher.
Absolutely.
So that's all. So pleasure talking to you, Arvind. Great meeting you and talking to you and getting your perspective.